In a hospital where saving lives should be the top priority, a black woman faced disdain and denial of care. No one knew she was the chief doctor. One rash decision by a nurse triggered a chain reaction, putting not only her career but the hospital's reputation at risk. What happened next will surprise even the most experienced. But let's start from the beginning. St. Andrew's Hospital stood as a towering structure of glass and concrete, rising above the city like an impenetrable fortress. Inside, life bustled. Teams of doctors and nurses rushed through the halls, monitors beeped incessantly, and the scent of antiseptic lingered in the air, blending with the tension and exhaustion that permeated every wall. Dr. Amelia Brooks, dressed in casual clothes, dark jeans, a loose sweater, and a jacket that concealed the contours of her authoritative figure, stepped into the emergency department. She intentionally left her white coat and ID badge behind, knowing that without them, she was just another ordinary black woman seeking medical help. Amelia moved forward, observing how things operated in her absence. Her sharp eyes scanned the crowded waiting area where tired, anxious faces reflected a mix of patience and desperation. "Next," a sharp, indifferent voice called out, robotic and detached. Approaching the reception desk, Amelia saw a young nurse with perfectly styled blonde hair and a mouth set in a tight, disapproving line. Her name badge read, Kimberly White. She didn't even bother looking up from her computer, typing with deliberate slowness. "Good evening," Amelia said gently but firmly. "I need to see a doctor urgently." Kimberly glanced at her, her gaze filled with something Amelia knew all too well, an automatic, cold assessment, where she had already been assigned a place. "Appointments are made through the online portal," the nurse said, irritation evident in her tone. "If you're not pre-registered, you'll have to wait." Amelia pressed her lips together, feeling a familiar wave of frustration. "I'm feeling unwell," she said, maintaining her composure. "I think I have an issue with my blood pressure." Kimberly raised an eyebrow and scoffed. "Do you have insurance?" The question hit like a slap. Not, "How are you feeling?" or "What seems to be the problem?" Just, "Do you have insurance?" As if that was the only measure of whether she deserved help. Amelia took a deep breath, suppressing the irritation bubbling inside her. "I don't think that should be the priority right now," she said firmly. Kimberly leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest, her voice even colder. "If you can't provide ID and proof of insurance, we'll have to delay your visit. Rules are rules." A few people in the waiting area shuffled impatiently. Someone sighed loudly behind Amelia. She felt a familiar pang, humiliation, anger, and disappointment all at once. She saw Kimberly's eyes flicker to her hands, noticing the lack of expensive jewelry, then to her simple clothes, drawing her conclusions in an instant. "I urge you to reconsider your approach," Amelia said calmly, though her voice carried a steely edge. "I'm seriously unwell. This is an emergency." Kimberly rolled her eyes theatrically and sighed. "Emergency? This isn't a charity clinic, ma'am. We deal with real patients here." The word "real" hit Amelia like a punch, but she refused to let it show. Someone behind her whispered, "This is outrageous." But no one spoke up. People in that waiting room were used to it, used to enduring, used to staying silent. Amelia suddenly realized this wasn't just about her. It was about the system, the countless barriers erected for people like her, even in a hospital where everyone should feel safe. She straightened up and looked at Kimberly with icy calm. "All right," she said, turning toward the exit. "We'll talk again soon." Kimberly smirked and called out, "Next!" As Amelia walked down the corridor, anger simmered beneath the surface. She glanced at the hospital logo on the wall and remembered her fight to make this place better for everyone. Reality, however, had proven to be much harsher. Pulling out her phone, she dialed a number. Without waiting for a greeting, she said firmly, "Gather all senior nurses in my office tomorrow. We have a serious problem." The next morning, Amelia walked into the hospital with a firm stride, exuding calm authority. Today, she was no longer the anonymous patient ignored at the reception desk. Today, she was Dr. Brooks, the chief medical officer, a woman whose authority no one dared to question. She wore her perfectly pressed white coat with her name embroidered in gold, and the badge that read Chief Medical Officer gleamed with every step. As soon as she entered the emergency department, all eyes turned to her. Nurses and doctors froze mid-step. Some hurriedly looked away, pretending to be engrossed in their paperwork. But Amelia could feel the tension, the way whispers about last night's incident had spread like wildfire throughout the hospital. She walked straight to the reception desk, where Kimberly White sat, the same nurse who had so easily dismissed her the night before. Kimberly glanced up and saw Amelia standing before her. Her face turned pale, and her lips pressed into a thin line. She jumped up from her seat, as if she wanted to say something, but the words caught in her throat. "Dr. Brooks," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Amelia folded her arms across her chest and fixed Kimberly with a cold, piercing gaze. "Interesting, Ms. White," she said quietly but firmly. "You weren't nearly as polite when I asked for medical assistance yesterday." Kimberly swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly as she fumbled with the papers on her desk, avoiding eye contact. I didn't know it was you, Dr. Brooks." Amelia's eyes narrowed. "So, if you had known, you would have treated me differently?" Silence fell over the room. The entire department was listening, though they pretended not to. Some were peeking from behind computer screens, while others stood motionless, eager to hear what would happen next. Kimberly's face turned red, and she struggled to find a response. Amelia, however, didn't give her the chance. "Tell me, Ms. White," Amelia continued, her voice sharp and unwavering, "how many other patients have received the same treatment from you? How many left without care simply because they didn't fit your expectations?" Kimberly opened her mouth, but no words came out. She shifted nervously, her fingers clutching a pen too tightly. At that moment, the department head, Dr. Richardson, a tall man with graying hair and a forced smile, approached in an attempt to defuse the situation. "Dr. Brooks," he said smoothly, "I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. Our staff always follows protocol." Amelia turned to him, her gaze sharp as a scalpel. "If your staff truly followed protocol," she said icily, "then those protocols need serious revision. Your job is to save lives, not decide who deserves care and who doesn't." Richardson hesitated, clearly caught off guard by her words. Amelia turned back to Kimberly, who now stood frozen in place, her posture tense, her confidence shattered. "Starting today, things will change," Amelia announced, her voice carrying through the department. "I want a full report on all patient complaints over the past 6 months on my desk by tomorrow morning. Every single one." A murmur spread through the department. Some nurses exchanged glances, clearly relieved that someone was finally addressing what they had endured in silence for too long. Others looked nervous, uncertain of what was to come. Kimberly's lips trembled, and her eyes filled with tears of shame and regret. She tried to say something, but Amelia held up a hand. "You'll have the chance to explain yourself later, Ms. White," Amelia said firmly. "For now, I suggest you reflect on what it truly means to be a healthcare professional." Without waiting for a response, Amelia turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the polished floors, leaving behind an air of uneasy silence. Inside the break room, conversations erupted once she left. Some staff members shook their heads, while others whispered to each other in hushed voices. "Did you see how she handled that? Finally, someone's holding them accountable. Honestly, this has been going on for years." Meanwhile, Kimberly sat motionless at the desk, her shoulders slumped and hands gripping the edge of the table. She felt the weight of judgment from her colleagues, the sting of humiliation, and the growing realization that, this time, she had gone too far. In her office, Amelia closed the door and allowed herself a moment to breathe. The frustration and disappointment she had felt the night before hadn't disappeared, but now they had transformed into something else: determination. She picked up the phone and dialed her assistant. "I want a mandatory sensitivity training scheduled for the entire staff," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Every single department. This cannot happen again." She knew this was just the beginning of a long battle, but Amelia Brooks wasn't one to back down. Just a few hours had passed since the morning incident, but the hospital was already buzzing like a beehive filled with tension and rumors. The story of how the chief medical officer was denied medical assistance had spread through the hallways like wildfire. People whispered at coffee machines, in break rooms, even in operating rooms, everywhere. Hushed conversations echoed. "Did you hear? She came in last night as a regular patient and Kimberly just dismissed her. Imagine if this gets to the media. It's a disaster. Honestly, this happens all the time. Finally, someone at the top is taking notice." Amelia walked through the corridors with her head held high, aware of the furtive glances thrown her way. She could feel the undercurrent of change sweeping through the hospital, and she knew this was not something to be swept under the rug. This was a defining moment, for herself, for the hospital, and for everyone who had ever faced discrimination in healthcare. Outside the hospital walls, the situation was escalating quickly. By the end of the workday, social media was flooded with posts and comments. Someone from the staff had posted anonymously on a medical forum. "If the chief medical officer can be denied care just because of the color of her skin, what's happening to ordinary patients?" The responses came in droves. "This happens everywhere. Finally, someone with power sees it. Our hospital has the same issues. Maybe this will lead to real change." Before long, local media caught wind of the story, and by evening, several news websites had published headlines like, "Scandal at St. Andrew's Hospital. Chief doctor faces discrimination in her own institution." Hospital staff stared at their phones in growing concern. The news was spreading like wildfire, and with it came reporters stationed outside the hospital entrance, eager for a statement. Patients in the waiting room murmured amongst themselves, some openly voicing their frustration. "No surprise. If you don't have insurance, they don't even look at you. I've experienced this treatment before. Glad it's finally coming to light." The next day, during her morning rounds, Amelia was approached by Dr. Richardson, the department head, looking visibly anxious. "Dr. Brooks, we have a situation," he stammered, clearing his throat. "Our reputation is on the line. The media wants a statement. Patients are filing complaints and staff morale is, well, tense. Maybe we should tone things down." Amelia fixed him with a steely gaze, her voice unwavering. "Tone down what, Dr. Richardson?" she asked coldly. "The fact that systemic discrimination exists in our hospital? That patients walk away without treatment because someone judged them unworthy?" Richardson shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "I just think we need a careful approach. We don't want this to turn into a full-blown scandal," he muttered. Amelia took a step closer, lowering her voice. "This is already a scandal, doctor, and it's not about public relations. It's about people's lives, and I won't let it be ignored." Richardson swallowed hard, nodded quickly, and stepped aside, clearly realizing he was on the wrong side of the argument. Meanwhile, Kimberly White was living through the worst day of her career. Behind her back, colleagues whispered. Some glanced at her with thinly veiled disdain. Others watched her with amusement. Hospital gossip was fast and merciless. She sat in the break room, clutching a cup of coffee, staring blankly at the table. Her hands trembled slightly, and her chest felt tight with regret and shame. She barely noticed when one of her colleagues, a nurse from another department, sat down beside her. Kim, you should talk to Dr. Brooks, the woman said gently. Kimberly bit her lip and shook her head. I don't know what to say, she whispered, her eyes welling with tears. I feel terrible. The nurse placed a comforting hand on Kimberly's shoulder. We all make mistakes. But what matters is how we fix them. You should at least apologize. Kimberly took a shaky breath, stood up abruptly, and muttered, I'll try. Amelia was in her office poring over a report detailing patient complaints from the past 6 months. Each page told a story of neglect, prejudice, and systemic failures. She traced a finger over the list of names, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. A hesitant knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Come in, she called, her voice steady. Kimberly stepped inside, looking nothing like the arrogant nurse from the night before. Her face was pale, her hands fidgeted nervously, and her eyes were filled with remorse. Dr. Brooks, she began softly. I wanted to apologize. Amelia remained silent, watching her closely, letting the tension linger. I realize now that I treated you unfairly, Kimberly continued, her voice shaking. I thought I was just following the rules, but I understand that I was wrong. I judged you based on appearances, and that's not what healthcare should be about. Amelia's gaze remained unreadable, but something softened in her expression. Ms. White, she said slowly, you don't owe me an apology. You owe it to the patients who walked away without the care they needed. This isn't just about me. It's about the system you're a part of. Kimberly swallowed hard, nodding, tears pooling in her eyes. I want to change, she whispered. I really do. Amelia studied her for a long moment before nodding. Good, she said. Then let's start with action. I want you to assist in developing a new patient intake protocol, one that ensures no one is turned away based on their background. Kimberly's eyes widened in surprise, but a flicker of determination crossed her face. I won't let you down, she said quietly. Outside Amelia's office, the hospital was still a whirlwind of activity, with reporters outside and patients demanding answers. But within those walls, something deeper was beginning to shift, a conversation that could no longer be ignored. Meanwhile, social media continued to buzz with activity. More and more patients came forward, sharing their experiences of discrimination, adding to the mounting pressure on the hospital's administration. One viral post told the heartbreaking story of a woman who had lost her mother after being denied emergency care. In response, Amelia initiated a community advisory board, bringing in local advocates and patients to have a voice in hospital policies. Standing in front of a packed room of concerned citizens, Amelia spoke with conviction. Today, we acknowledge our failures, and we commit to doing better. We can't change the past, but we can change the future, together. Her words were met with applause, and for the first time in a long while, Amelia felt something close to hope. The battle wasn't over, but progress had begun. A week had passed since the discrimination scandal at St. Andrew's Hospital erupted across social media and news outlets. Every step in the hospital now felt heavier, and every glance from colleagues was filled with tension. The atmosphere was thick, as if the entire hospital was holding its breath, waiting for an explosion that could happen at any moment. At the center of it all was Kimberly White. She felt like a stranger in a place that once felt like home. The colleagues she used to laugh with during breaks now avoided her eyes. Some simply looked right through her, as if she no longer existed. In the break room, a suffocating silence hung in the air as Kimberly sat alone at a table, absent-mindedly stirring her coffee. She stared at a spot on the wall, feeling the weight of shame pressing down on her chest. Suddenly, the head nurse, Marianne, a kind but strict woman with graying hair, sat down beside her. Kim, have you talked to Dr. Brooks yet? Marianne asked softly. Kimberly swallowed hard and shook her head. I don't know what to say, she whispered, clutching her coffee cup tightly. I'm so ashamed. Marianne sighed and placed a comforting hand on Kimberly's. We all make mistakes, but what matters is how we fix them. You need to face this before it's too late. Kimberly felt a lump form in her throat. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she nodded slowly. She stood up abruptly, as if afraid she'd change her mind if she hesitated. I'll try, she mumbled before hurrying out of the room. In her office, Amelia Brooks was meticulously reviewing the hospital's patient complaints from the past 6 months. Each report was a painful reminder of neglect, bias, and systemic failure. She ran her finger down a long list of cases, feeling the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Come in, she said firmly. The door opened and Kimberly stepped inside. Gone was the arrogant nurse from a week ago. Now she stood with slumped shoulders, fidgeting hands, and eyes filled with remorse. Dr. Brooks, Kimberly started, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to apologize. Amelia set her pen down and leaned back in her chair, observing Kimberly with a calm, unreadable expression. Go on, she said evenly. Kimberly shifted uncomfortably, wringing her hands. I realize now that I treated you unfairly, she admitted. I thought I was just following protocol, but I understand now that I was wrong. I judged you based on appearances, and that's not what healthcare should be about. Amelia remained silent for a moment, then spoke with quiet intensity. Kimberly, your apology shouldn't be directed at me. It should be directed at the patients who left this hospital without the care they needed. This isn't just about me. It's about the system you're a part of. Kimberly swallowed hard, her eyes glistening with tears. I want to change, she whispered. I want to make things right. Amelia studied her carefully, then nodded. Good, she said. Then let's start with action. I want you to assist in developing a new patient intake protocol, one that guarantees equal treatment for everyone, no matter their background. Kimberly's eyes widened in surprise, but a flicker of determination replaced the fear in her gaze. I won't let you down, she said, her voice stronger now. Outside the hospital, the scandal continued to grow. Reporters camped outside the entrance, eager for statements. Inside, staff nervously checked their phones, reading comments and headlines about their workplace. Amelia, however, was already working on solutions. She called an emergency meeting with hospital leaders, doctors, and nurses. The conference room was filled with tension as she stood before them. The words, "Equality in healthcare, it starts with us," displayed on the screen behind her. She looked at the gathered staff and spoke with firm conviction. I know many of you feel uncomfortable. Some may think this is just a misunderstanding, but let me make one thing clear. This is not an isolated incident. This is a systemic issue that we must address now. A murmur spread through the room. Some staff members shifted uneasily, while others nodded in agreement. Starting today, Amelia continued, we are implementing mandatory inclusivity training for all staff members. Every single one of you will participate because healthcare is for everyone, no matter their race, social status, or background. There was a moment of silence, then a quiet ripple of applause spread through the room. Social media remained ablaze with stories from patients who had experienced discrimination at the hospital. One post, detailing a woman whose mother had died after being denied treatment, went viral, adding fuel to the fire. In response, Amelia spearheaded the creation of a community advisory board, allowing local residents to voice their concerns and work alongside hospital leadership to bring about meaningful changes. Standing before a packed room of concerned citizens, Amelia addressed them with unwavering determination. Today, we acknowledge our past mistakes, and we commit to doing better. We can't change what has already happened, but we can ensure a better future. Together. Her words were met with applause, and for the first time in days, Amelia felt the weight on her shoulders lighten. As weeks passed, small but noticeable changes began taking root within the hospital. Staff members attended inclusivity workshops, patient interactions became more compassionate, and an air of awareness replaced the previous indifference. One afternoon, as Amelia walked past the reception desk, she overheard an elderly black woman hesitantly approach Kimberly. "Excuse me, I'm not sure where I should go," the woman said timidly. Kimberly, now wearing a softer expression, responded with warmth Amelia hadn't seen before. "Don't worry, ma'am. I'll help you." A smile tugged at Amelia's lips. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a step in the right direction. Kimberly's journey of redemption, like the hospital's transformation, was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, Amelia felt that real change was possible. This experience had been a lesson for everyone, for Kimberly, for the hospital, and for the community. And though the road ahead was long, Amelia knew they had taken the first crucial steps toward building a truly inclusive healthcare system. The fight was far from over, but the seeds of change had been planted.